Sekeres and Price, another special edition thereof. This one for Saturday, February 1st, 2025, coming to you from the Nation Network studio, built by Arbor Lee here at the historic Wall Center. And as always, this show a presentation of Bet365. Open an account with Bet365 today. Bet on a huge range of markets, so whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Use code NATION when opening that account. Matt Sekeres alongside a wind-burned, rosy-cheeked, après-ski Blake Price from Whistler, four-time Juno Award winner Mike Rogerson hitting switches and conducting things. When we signed off yesterday, Blake, following the JT Miller trade, we said, hey, a whole lot more to discuss on Monday. Well, to the shock of everyone, including the NHL world, the Canucks were not done with their dealing yesterday. They make the second trade for Marcus Paterson of the Pittsburgh Penguins. So here we are back on a Saturday following Patrik Allvin's media availability. The Canucks plane was delayed coming back from Dallas, so Allvin has just concluded his media session at the airport, and we have it from the horse's mouth. How about this?
And they owe Jeff Paterson and Rinkwide an apology, too, because they kept them deep by making this trade. Just as Rinkwide was just about to wrap up, boom, the trade happens. They didn't have to go back up. They stayed on, and they did an extended. Yeah. So there's their analysis, and now we've had some time and a chance to hear from the GM Patrik Allvin on what he thought of it, and we get to analyze more.
Yeah, Jeff was just about to sign off, so thanks to Jeff Paterson, Patrick Johnston, and Jacob Lazar for burning the midnight oil last night with that second trade. Our Surrey Mitsubishi poll question, quite simply, how do you feel about the Canucks trade with Pittsburgh? Winger Danton Heinen, and sadly a local guy placed just, not even 2/3 of a season for his hometown team after signing in free agency. He's on the move alongside Vincent Desharnais, two of the free agents who just did not work out this season. Prospect Melvin Fernstrom from the Swedish League, and that 2025 first-round pick, top 13 protected, acquired earlier yesterday from the New York Rangers. They go to Pittsburgh for Marcus Paterson, defenseman Marcus Paterson. They have three Patersons now, and forward Drew O'Connor. I haven't heard from you on this yet, Blake. What do you think?
Well, I think it's the big worry here. I don't mind the trade at face value, the cap freedom that they get from getting out of the second years of those Desharnais and Heinen deals is very nice. I would say the biggest risk here in this deal, and you've offloaded the first round pick. So you could argue, could you have used this first round pick better? Maybe, but Paterson was going to be one of the bells of the ball at the trade deadline anyway. So I don't know that that's necessarily the case. My biggest fear of this deal is, does it set the Vancouver Canucks up to be over the barrel by the Paterson group to re-sign him? Because they didn't trade for him to let him walk away. They are going to re-sign Marcus Paterson. Marcus Paterson's agent knows they're going to sign Marcus Paterson. And so he can ask for sun, moon, and stars. And the Vancouver Canucks pretty much have to give it to him, because they cannot afford to lose him after what they just spent acquiring him. So that's to me my biggest worry. I think you can argue that they misused the first round pick, but I mean, we'll just never know, because we don't know what the costs are going to be to acquire that defenseman near the trade deadline.
Well, we got a little bit more insight on that today, Blake, and it's not exactly a cut and dry, but Michael Granlund and Cody Ceci go from San Jose to Dallas for a first and a fourth round pick. That fourth can turn into a third. You mentioned Paterson being one of the bells of the ball here. I think you're right. There's going to be other defensemen there on the market. Cece's now gone, of course. Will Borgen was re-signed by the New York Rangers. You still got David Savard in Montreal, Ristolainen in Philadelphia, though an onerous contract there. Provorov looks like he's just going to stay in Columbus. So the pickings were getting slimmer on defense. The trade has grown on me since last night. Still, at the moment, I'm voting dislike just because of the uncertainty around both these players who are coming in, both unrestricted free agents. By all means, getting rid of Danton Heinen and Desharnais, that's asset value there. The two of those players combining to make $4.25 million, not just this year, but next year as well. So getting them off the books was good. It has further increased the Vancouver Canucks cap space for this year and beyond. But yes, I think Paterson joining the group, proving everything that his reputation is, helping the team not only make the playoffs, but then, of course, re-signing, I think, is very key to this deal. Our friends at Surrey Mitsubishi have a special program exclusively for the Sekeres and Price audience. If you've been turned down for financing at other dealerships, Surrey Mitsubishi has a dedicated representative, Jessica, who's going to help you with their in-house financing program. Bad credit, negative equity on your current car, Jessica will apply the special program for you. Do everything possible to make sure you're approved. Email Jessica at surreymitsubishi.com. Mention Sekeres and Price. Some conditions apply. Surrey Mitsubishi, 13820 104th Avenue. And yes, we invite you to vote on the Surrey Mitsubishi poll question at our X and YouTube accounts. Our top story today brought to you by Yellow Dog Brewing, Neighborhood Brewing, Foolish Winery. The Vancouver Canucks with the biggest one-day team makeover since the Pat Quinn era 30-plus years ago. In conjunction, the two trades send JT Miller, Eric Brandstrom, Jackson Dorrington, an unsigned draft pick, Heinen, Desharnais, Verfernstrom, and that first for Philip Hedl, Victor Mancini, Marcus Pettersson, and Drew O'Connor. Now, it is not a net loss of a first-round pick. People were all over me for this on X last night, but it is part of the trade cost. As you mentioned, Blake, they had that first-round pick in hand. Could they have done more with it? Patrik Allvin asked a very poignant question today from Gemma Carson-Smith of the Canadian Press. Are you better? Here's what Allvin had to say moments ago.
Patrik, is your roster better today than it was yesterday?
It's definitely different. I do like the pieces we have added here. Marcus was a key piece for us. We've been looking since the summer, and those type of defensemen is hard to get. And I felt with him, there wasn't a whole lot available on the market, and I didn't. A lot of teams asked for young players: Tom Willander, Minio, Kudryavtsev, Elias Pettersson. I feel that those guys are on their way to the big club, or some of them on their way to Abbotsford. So we didn't want to part ways with our young, good defensemen there, and obviously getting Sheedle, Mancini, and Drew O'Connor was big pieces for us. How we want to play and how we want to construct our.
Apologies for the echo there. We're stick handling this quickly here. As mentioned, it was just moments ago. A couple of things stuck out for me there, Blake. Number one, more often than not, you make trades. The GM comes out and says, we're better today. He was unable to utter that phrase. And then secondly, and this one is pretty significant in terms of what the Canucks think of these young defensemen they have coming up, he preferred trading a first-round pick in this draft to Sawyer Minio, Elias Pettersson, DPD, or Kirill Kudryavtsev. That tells me they hold a very high opinion of their young defensemen and anticipate that these guys are going to play in the NHL sooner rather than later.
Well, he also later went on to say that DPD is not going to be allowed to go down to the AHL All-Star game. He wants to keep him around. So you're right. I think we've seen who are the apples of the eye in the prospect system right now. And, there's some defensemen that are there. The important thing for them was to start to add some younger forwards, I think, some really promising forwards. And I think that's where Hedl comes in. Is Hedl going to be there's more moves coming. We're going to get to this. But if it's not this year, at next year, is Hedl the second line center? Or is he the third line center? I think it's very possible they go and try to usurp Hedl and get something better than him and have him as the third line center. Again, that might not be this year. but I think that has to be their goal here at this point.
In the near term, he is going to have to masquerade as their second line center. More on this. We'll have a section here on all the different pivot points of these trades. Needless to say, after making the Miller deal, as you point out, Blake, they obviously felt a need for reinforcements there. As much as they think, Hedl could be a player here, they were a weaker team at the National Hockey League level after making the JT Miller trade, because JT Miller's a better player than Philip Hedl. And look, Victor Mancini may or may not help you this year. Jim Rutherford, following the loss in Dallas last night, quote, "It's been a trying season to say the least. To be honest, we're in a fight just to make the playoffs right now, but we are building for the stretch run. And the thing is, we're also building for the future as well. We're building moving forward." Rick Tocchet was very complimentary of JT Miller, but did acknowledge that there were, quote, "things happened behind the scenes." And Tyler Myers, who we've sort of looked to as the conscience of this room now, acknowledged that JT Miller, quote, "held so much weight in the room, probably the most I've seen on any team I've been on." And I think at the end of the day, that was part of the problem here, Blake. We're going to hear from Patrik Allvin. Did you want in on this, or do you want to hear from Allvin first on?
I saw Dan Murphy tweeting last night as well, sort of saying his goodbye to JT Miller. Dan likes to keep cards close to the vest a little bit, but he gave a heartfelt goodbye on Twitter and said, "Hey, this isn't about Elias Pettersson." He said he didn't want to make this about, he likes Miller versus Pettersson. He's just saying, just in a silo, what Miller brought to the table, any team would have on the team and on their team, and that there's a huge loss. This team was hot. This is the only scenario in which JT Miller gets traded, really. I mean, I can't think of another way that JT Miller gets traded. This is a very unique circumstance that got away on them and that wasn't repairable smartly in any other way than this. Like, you could have traded Pettersson, I suppose, but again, the smartly part where you're choosing the 30-something forward over the 20-something forward, it just didn't make any sense. So there was a loss here in that room, and we can point to the temperament of JT Miller all we want and say that it was inappropriate at times, and there are 1,000 rumors out there, almost none of which are true, but people formulate a bunch of things. But in the end, this was probably the only exit route,
Yeah, I mean, we for years there drew the similarities between JT Miller and Ryan Kessler, the American centerman. Great with the media, even if they were grumpy sometimes, great with the fans, but you do have to get along with your teammates, the coaching staff, and other members of the organization. Patrik Allvin at the airport upon landing was asked why they had to move Miller. Here's what he had to say.
Well, I think this was a conversation between myself and JT and his agent that started about 2 months ago with his health and the environment we had. During the time and during the discussions leading up to yesterday, I felt that he probably needed a fresh start and where he was in his life and in his age and with his family, that this was the best option for him and the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah, so fresh start, change of scenery. It was interesting. He twice mentioned JT Miller's health when replying about the player. He would later add that JT did not request a trade, but said something changed at that leave of absence he took in late November, and that from that point forward, Miller and his camp were very much aware that the Vancouver Canucks were looking to move him, feeling it was best for all parties involved. Our buddy Rob Williams of the Daily Hive, who joins us usually on Thursday, I thought with a good tweet last night. You have to wonder what the Canucks, you've already brought it up, Blake, could have acquired in a trade for the Rangers first rounder. If they traded it in June, getting 2 pending UFAs back while offloading a couple of contracts for a first rounder is underwhelming. And you can really argue 2 underwhelming trades there, especially for a lay fan who's sitting there going, how are we trading a point per game player for a guy who's not even a second line center and a guy who's not even an NHL regular? Okay, we're getting the first round pick. Okay, we're throwing another first round pick out there for rentals after watching Zadorov and Lindholm come and go as rentals last year. Rob Oates adds their moves of a team not willing to give up on this year, and once again they recognized, of course, and corrected their mistakes quickly on Heinen, on Desharnais, and after already moving out Daniel Sprong. His was a very brief tenure for the Vancouver Canucks. So between the two,
to no big consequence either. Like I don't know that anybody's mourning Heinen and Desharnais' departure here. The cost of moving them on is wrapped up in the first round pick. Like, although I'd love to find the alternate universe, Matt, where somebody just trades for Marcus Pettersson in 2 weeks' time. Like, what's the cost? Like a middling to late.
Pittsburgh was asking for a first round pick. Yeah, I think what happened here is Pittsburgh wanted a first round pick for Pettersson. Were willing to take on Heinen and Desharnais while getting a little extra sugar there in Fernstrom, and we're willing to add O'Connor for that. And O'Connor is a very cheap bottom 6 forward who kills penalties, and in fact, that'll be the straight swap there. O'Connor was amongst the primary penalty killers, first 2 units for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Danton Heinen was the same thing for the Vancouver Canucks, so the Canucks get cheaper there. Maybe also get faster, get a guy who has played center ice as well, and that could be big here, of course, because you've traded a center iceman out in JT Miller for a lesser one in Hedel. We've seen Suter play in the middle of the ice. I think we can say that Suter's probably better served playing on the wing. I think certainly his playmaking, his offense is better on the wing. Between the 2 trades, the Canucks save $2.87 million on the annual cap hit for this season. That leaves them with about $6.8 million in cap space. They can add $12.3 million worth of players at the deadline, Blake. So they suddenly are sitting on a mother load of cap space if they do want to go out sometime over the next 5 weeks and further improve this club.
Matt, wouldn't you put the mortgage on that happening? Like as has been already stated by others.
Yes.
Yeah, like these are now trades. These are salvage the season kind of trades. You don't trade for Pettersson right now if this isn't a salvage the season mentality. So with that in mind, yeah, I would expect them to use all 12 million of that cap space, come hell or high water. Now, whether they get a player early and it's a little less than 12 million, or at the deadline for 12 million, we'll see. They probably want to see how the team plays currently, but.
Yeah, number one, I'm not sure they're going to use all 12 million. You have moved out a lot of futures here over the last couple of years. Number two, yeah, I would bet the mortgage on it with the one caveat: if they go out and lose a whole bunch of games here in quick order in succession, that may change the price. That may change the outlook of Rutherford Allvin. Because here's the other thing. These trades save nearly $7 million off next year's cap. And the Canucks are now looking, and it depends how you chop it, who you're putting on, but they have roughly $27 million in cap space this summer. 7.5 of that, of course, is the jump that was announced just on Friday. The cap's going up by that much. So they got $68 million committed to 9 forwards, 5 defensemen, and 1 goalie. So you need about 4 more forwards. You need about 3 more defensemen and another goalie. This does not include your RFAs, Aatu Ratu and Linus Karlsson, who are going to be re-signed and not going to cost you a whole lot. The UFA, the UFA list reads Brock Besser, Pius Suter, Kyle O'Connor, Phil DiGiuseppe, Drew O'Connor, Marcus Pettersson, and Derek Ford. Yeah, exactly. Derek Forbert, Noah Juleson, and Kevin Lankinen, importantly. So that's the in-house free agent list. And especially if you're not re-signing Brock Besser, because Besser would take a significant chunk of that $27 million. Patrik Allvin is going to have a lot more freedom and flexibility to go shopping this summer than he did this past summer.
Yeah, and there's a lot less butterflies in his stomach, I'm sure, about the ability just to keep the guys that he wants as well. So all that is good. I think we should clarify too. I don't think they make a rental. Like if they're making another deal here, Matt, I would guess they're probably going to use their current first round pick and get somebody with term. Like that's the kind of deal I think that they're going to pull off. I don't know that there's much in the way of rentals here because I don't even know what you dangle. Like even if you were
you're looking for a second line center.
Yeah, I know.
You're looking for
it.
Well, first of all, are there any second line centers? Brock Nelson is probably the only one from a rental point of view. He also has a modified no trade clause. I believe it's 16-team no trade list. He's an American guy. Would he come here? I don't know. Does this put you on the market for Ryan O'Reilly? He's got 2 years left, Blake, $4.5 million. They've been attached to him in the past. I think at this stage of the game, O'Reilly's probably better suited as a third-line center, but could you convince yourself that Elias Pettersson, Ryan O'Reilly, Philip Hedl is enough over the top three centers? And, of course, what would O'Reilly cost you? The Dylan Cousins piece is still out there. 5 years left, $7.1 million. You would think that's more of a Elias Pettersson trade, but who knows? Maybe Buffalo is just so upset with Cousins right now. It would cost you less than that. Granlund went off the board today in that trade between the Sharks and the Stars. And then there's other rental centermen available, but none that I would say raised to the level of a second-line guy. Lastly,
do the Avs want out from underneath Casey Middlestat?
He's failing as a second-line center there.
Right.
So
yes, he is.
You would have to look at him and say, okay, that's a one-time first-round pick. We like the skill set. We think we can do more with him. And just before we tell you about our friends at Yellow Dog, referenced the biggest one-day makeover since Pat Quinn. Some will remember. And Steve Tambolini, one of Pat's lieutenants at the time who was in the room, has told us the story many, many times. There's a deal on the table with the St. Louis Blues. They were hesitant to give up Sergio Momesso. All his advisors were saying, Pat, it's a good deal. Let's just make it without Momesso. And the big Irishman held the line. It was March 5th, 1991, Garth Butcher and Dan Quinn from the Vancouver Canucks to the St. Louis Blues for Jeff Courtnall, Cliff Ronning, Sergio Momesso, and Robert Dirk. They also acquired Dana Merson from the Calgary Flames that day, a massive team makeover. And, of course, many of those names were still there in 1994 when the Vancouver Canucks made their run to the Stanley Cup final. What's up with our friends at Yellow Dog? What's that?
Well, maybe
they had to wait a couple of years.
Yeah. Let's tell you about the Wild Extra Pale. Neighborhoods released this in collaboration with New Country Radio there in the Okanagan. It's crispy, it's hoppy, it's crushably. It's a brew for all Wranglers, perfect to share with all of your wild amigos. The Wild Extra Pale Ale from Neighborhood Brewing.
So these trades pivot on so many what ifs, and if you wanted to criticize them and take a harsh, cynical eye to them, you would go down some of these boulevards. We have touched on a couple of them already. Will Philip Hedl first and foremost avoid concussions? And Patrik Allvin said the medicals checked out. That was important to them. Will he avoid concussions, stay healthy, and get back to being a poor man's second-line center as he was a couple of years ago before the concussions, or at least an upper-end third-line center? Will Marcus Pettersson stabilize this defense score, improve the zone exits, the puck transportation, help them create a little bit more off the rush, and, of course, re-sign at a digestible cap number? Can all these new faces come together quickly, help the Canucks make the playoffs? Or is the room now fractured because Elias Pettersson forced JT Miller out? That will be a narrative coming out of this weekend. Patrik Allvin was asked about that, how to avoid a splintered room following all this trade activity. Here's what the Canucks GM had to say.
I think that's up to the players. You're growing in the leadership, and it's my job to create an environment where the players feel safe. And you're building the culture, starting with our prospects in Abbotsford and leading up to the big team here. The growth of Quinn Hughes as a captain during my time here has been impressive. How he's handled different situations. A lot of credit to the coaching staff and Rick Tocchet as well. Obviously, the coaching staff that I have, their experience and what they've dealt with in the old days when Rick and Adam Foote played, I think they would have sold this things outside the ice and dealt with it different ways. But I'm proud what JT went through and what the team have done here, getting together and talking, and again, winning solves a lot of problems.
And man,
Yeah,
I
old school.
think one thing that they could do to get the community back here a little bit, like if they have any intention on re-signing Brock Besser, and only they know, and maybe he's part of the mix for a centerman. I don't know.
I don't think they do, Blake. But I hear, yeah.
If they have any intention, you sign that as a goodwill of it's okay, guys. We still got the gang. The gang's still here. That would be something to warm the cockles of their heart a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if they don't have any intention, you might want to peel that scab off. Peel that Band-Aid off quickly.
Well, the rest of this is fresh.
Yeah.
You're quite right. It might warm the cockles of Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes' hearts as well, and especially Quinn Hughes, because he said all the right things last night in Dallas, but you have to wonder where the captain's at watching all of this happen. To Allvin's point, old school guys like Tocchet and Foote, old school would have fixed this a lot differently than how it winds up being fixed here. Interesting that he has thrown this on the players, but also talked about grow into leadership. And Blake, a couple weeks ago, we had Mike Gillis in studio, and he said, we didn't assume we had leaders. We worked with them, and also moving out veteran players like Marcus Naslund allowed the Sedins and Roberto and others to grow into the leaders on that 2011 Vancouver Canucks Cup team. And the other place this trade pivots is Victor Mancini. And apologies, I typed him up as Vincent last night on Twitter. But Victor Mancini, a late bloomer who I know our buddy Frank Corrado really likes, a big right shot defenseman who's got some puck transportation, is a little bit more mobile than his size would suggest as well. So we'll talk more about him because needless to say, if he can be an NHL regular, then you're looking at 2 NHL regulars for JT Miller as opposed to just the straight swap on Hedl, a depth piece, and a pick that you wound up using for Marcus Pettersson. Very, very acute and pronounced conclusion that one can draw after yesterday's trade activity, because here's the thing. For a team that struggled to score offense here to score goals over the second 25-game segment of this season, I think you can argue this team is worse offensively now. When you make the moves of who was going out, and principally JT Miller, nearly a point per
individually
game.
Offensively, Matt. Individually, like guys that can individually create offense, yes. But
I'm about to get there, Blake. Yes, very good.
They've got the pieces to generate offense, hopefully a lot better. Like I don't know if we've got the JFresh bar graph on Marcus Pettersson. Like his exits. Like he's got a bunch of stats that are exactly what this team needs. Like exit passes, fast exits. Like they'll get the puck out, and 2 skaters in Hedl and O'Connor that are fast as lightning as well. So I know that, and that's going to be a hurdle for a lot of fans, Matt, because the sexiness of the individual offensive guy is undeniable, right? You get a
Yep.
you get a guy who's got that one-on-one skill. You're happy about it. You're excited, but
You're
if
picking
you've got
up
a positive mind, it's different.
Yeah, you're picking up what I'm putting down. Management has shifted the balance of this team via these two trades. They have built a team more capable of playing Rick Tocchet hockey, and they can now evaluate him and his staff more accurately before extending him, before that mutual option comes into play this summer. You mentioned the J Fresh player card on Paterson. He calls him a top-pair defenseman, first of all. Solid puck mover and complementary presence, has improved offensively. Tall but not strong, gets hit constantly. Very good defensive stick, can swing the puck around the offensive zone, hits the deck a bit too much. Not too concerned about the defensive drop-off given the environment he's been in this season. He's been incentivized to take a lot of risks that he probably won't in Vancouver. He's generally been a strong two-way play driver. He has height and length, if not weight, Blake, and we know they like the big defenseman. He's got some bite as well. He's fought guys like Tom Wilson and our old friend Jonah Gadjevich. And Jay Fresh also notes that since 2017-18, no player in the league has been hit more than Marcus Paterson. He's been hit 1,331 times. So he knows how to hit a puck. He will sacrifice his body to make the correct play. Of course, he's an old Jim Rutherford acquisition as well from Pittsburgh. Began his career in Anaheim. Rutherford was crowing about him last night. Quote, he's just what we need, in my opinion. You know what he is? He's just a very, very steady defenseman. You need to have guys like that if you want to win in this league, and he's one of the really good ones.
And he glowed about him in the room as well. Glowed about him in the room. So,
yep.
They're trying to swing the pendulum in the other direction, and he made a point of was he talking to Josh Yohe there, saying, this is a guy that it was one of the key reasons why they wanted to bring Marcus Paterson in. So clearly, it's a room makeover as much as it is a team makeover.
Filipino, as you mentioned, is a big body who can move. He's also very comfortable in traffic, both in the net front area and battling on the boards, and that is so Rick Tocchet hockey when you're talking when you think of how many times he's mentioned the guts of the ice, the interior board work. So O'Connor, we mentioned, a speedy forechecking left winger, chases down pucks and battles on the boards, but his total lack of finishing touch made him frustrating presence with the Penguins Hall of Fame centers. This is also the J Fresh player card. Will probably slot effectively in a bottom six role. He also, as we mentioned, replaces Heinen as we think, second unit penalty killer. Can play the middle a little bit, so another forechecker, but this one with speed, and we talked about how much the Canucks lack speed, Blake, and how that shows up against teams like Winnipeg and New Jersey. And then the late blooming Mancini, huge defensive defenseman, but with physicality, underrated puck moving, and skating. We'll see how much he plays for the Canucks this year. Patrik Allvin allowed that all four of these new addition players are coming in later tonight. Mancini coming up depending on the health of others. He talked about how they hope these guys galvanize the group and make them better. Incidentally, Quinn Hughes is a game-time decision after the injury last night, as is Kiefer Sherwood. Allvin wouldn't commit to any of these guys playing, saying that's going to be on Rick Tocchet's plate to decide. The other thing I'll ask you, Blake, given the composition, the makeup now of this team, where I think you can say you have absolutely improved defensively and you hope you're going to improve offensively via all the ways you just outlined, do they now need Jonathan Lekkerimäki's shot and goal-scoring threat more than ever?
Well, you could say that about him. You could say that about Aatu Räty as well. Like I joked, and I knew it was hopeful when I tweeted it that now would be a really nice time for Aatu Räty to declare himself ready for the National Hockey League. And that doesn't mean that he would jump Hedl and become the second line center, but if he could be the third line center, and you'd have two young, creative setters down, that would at least stem the tide. That would at least be a stopgap measure and be a developmental step for Aatu Räty. So there's a couple of guys I think that could prove to be valuable here if they want to take that next step. It's a big ask. And I don't know that there's going to be a lot of runway because, as we said, the Canucks are probably going to make new deals. But yeah, there's opportunity right now if these guys get into the lineup to prove their worth here.
More from Patrik Allvin's media availability. We won't play the clips. We'll just paraphrase at this point. When talking about Miller, he talked about how he was super competitive, but also walking the fine line. He said he was also dealing with a lot of other things. He said this was not about 2 players. It was about 23 players, which I think is both important and a good bit of honesty from Patrik Allvin. Number one, to shelter Elias Pettersson, right? The last thing he wants is for this to be framed, even though many will do it, that Elias Pettersson won a power struggle with JT Miller. But mentioning 23 other players, Cam Robinson had told us a couple of weeks ago, Quinn Hughes was tiring of this. I think there were others in the Vancouver Canucks room and organization that were also tiring of JT Miller. But he did mention it's not a country club. It's going to be a competitive environment, and you wonder about the accountability going forward because you knew JT was going to keep others accountable. Who does that now alongside the captain, Quinn Hughes? He acknowledged that this wasn't – he acknowledged that Pittsburgh did not know he was getting a first-round pick, top 13 protected from the New York Rangers. He also said the protection was of their framing, not New York's, but he knew what it was going to take to get Marcus Pettersson from Pittsburgh, and he knew that the conditions on that pick were going to satisfy Kyle Dubas and the Pens. So that's an adept bit of managing there. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we should clarify that when he says he framed it, he probably suggested that, but no one's going to be like, no, let's put restrictions on this first round pick. You know, like his idea so that New York would bite on it. Well, rather than say, we're not going to give you your first round pick, but let's not make it out like just out of the kindness of my heart, you know, let's do it like this. I mean, he would rather have done that than asked for their second round this year, right? It guaranteed the second round this year. So that's what I think what he was saying is he wanted the first round pick, but acknowledged they weren't going to give it to him without any restrictions, I think is what he was saying.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, I think the Rangers said we want to protect him for this, and Patrik knew that he had to get it down to 12 or 13. And I say that because, Blake, when you pick in the top 11, you actually have a snowball's chance of picking first overall, right? Whereas if your pick is slotted to be 12th or 13th, the most you can move up to is into the top 3 and not into that first overall selection. So I think that's probably roughly where and why the line was drawn there at 13. He said he has not talked to Marcus Pettersson's agent. They have simply exchanged text messages right now. He says he sees Drew O'Connor as a winger, but he has played center. And in fact, we'll get to this on Monday's show. Mike Sullivan has mused about him improving here, especially if he plays center. O'Connor apparently played with Connor Garland on Team USA at the World Championships a couple of years ago. And perhaps my favorite question of the session, Thomas Drance asked Patrik Allvin if he and Jim Rutherford had spoken and basically coordinated what Jim was going to say publicly in that explosive Gary Mason interview from earlier in the week, Blake. And Patrik responded with an all-timer. Jim was and is an extremely honest man. He said it was no secret and that Rutherford did not need to discuss with him what he was going to say to Gary Mason, which when you look back at it now, Blake, and Rutherford has done this before, I think he probably had a good idea that he knew what was coming, both in terms of the JT Miller trade and the Marcus Pettersson acquisition.
I think looking back now, we can also look at Aatu Ratu's call-up as a hint of when they actually knew something was coming down the pike as well, because there was no need for Aatu Ratu in that moment. So they must have known we better get him here from the road on the road with us because it's coming down in hours. And,
I think they had a little shelter
whatever.
there when Sherwood went to IR, but you're quite right. I think they knew they needed another center just in case a scenario like wound up happening. JT Miller called out of the room and scratched quickly before a game. He's got more flexibility and options with his newfound cap space. He did say he has to be cautious for next year, so that was interesting, maybe a clue on Brock Besser. And when he was asked about did the mistakes of the summer force all of this upon you, he answered it narrowly and said, oh, well, we were always going to hunt for a top 4 defenseman, which I think is absolutely true. We've been talking about that from the
Let's get to the
very
super chat
jump of the season. Yes, let's please go ahead.
Azrak. Ultimately, we need development to find hidden gems. Hey, everybody wants hidden gems, and the Canucks have them. Like a DPD, I think qualifies as a hidden gem. I think Nils Höglander was a hidden gem when he made his rise. I mean, they're not
anyone after the first round is a hidden gem.
Yeah.
Like
Arthur Shields was a hidden gem. So like,
yes.
it's not like they haven't had them, but yeah, when they fall in your lap, it's great. It's found money, right?
Yeah, and which is why I think they continue to be encouraged by the likes of Sawyer Minio and Kirill Kudryavtsev and some of the other guys who would qualify as quote-unquote hidden gems for this franchise. Thank you for the super chat, and a reminder, partial proceeds of all our super chats this year going to the BC Mental Health Foundation. Okay, I see you're itching there for a hot chocolate or a coffee by the fireplace. Oh. Thank you for taking time out from Whistler. Give my best to Al Chris Manson of the Whistler Golf Club, all our friends up there. And we will be back on Monday with more of Sekeres and Price and more dissecting a franchise-altering day for the Vancouver Canucks. Friday, January 31st, and I think it was Jeff that tweeted it. 2 years ago, the Bo Horvat trade on January 30th. Last year, the Elias Lindholm trade on January 31st. This year, the biggest team makeover in 34 years. Late January, everybody. Just put it on the calendar. Year in, year out. The Vancouver Canucks are going to do something big. Sekeres and Price, a presentation of Bet365. Open an account with Bet365 today. Bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Use code NATION when opening that account. Last thing we'll say, that Miller guy got 2 goals for the New York Rangers today. Tied his season high, had 2 goals against the Habs for Vancouver earlier in the season, and was most respectful of the Canucks in an intermission interview where he said they provided him all sorts of help this year, no disrespect, but that acknowledged that he did want to come back one day to the New York Rangers, of course, his first team. He scores 2 goals.
A fresh start. They said he needed a fresh start. This is what fresh starts do to guys. It allows them to shed some weight and be the players that they intend to be. We'll see what this does for Philip Hedl, who's had a devil of a time with injuries. And you know, all the other Marcus Pettersson's got a new leash on life. He's got a new leash on life. He's got a new team with probably a better prospect at the playoffs than his former team. Stay tuned to Rink Wide tomorrow, and we can debrief the debuts of all the new players.
Well, yeah. I mean, I suspect at least Paterson and Hedl are going to play. Well, O'Connor too. We'll see about we'll see about Mancini, and of course, we'll see about the health of some of these Canucks regulars. Yeah, JT with 2 goals for the Rangers. They did lose the game to Boston. It is Boston, and of course, all eyes now on March 22nd at the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden, Canucks versus Rangers. And I sure hope we see Elias Pettersson and JT Miller on the opening faceoff. Talk to you Monday, everybody.